"Look at her," the lawyer sneered, pointing a manicured finger at the woman in the frayed grey cardigan. "She's a nobody, a squatter, a waste of this court's time." The entire courtroom laughed. To them, she was just Era, the quiet, dishevelled woman being sued for millions by a global tech giant. They thought they were crushing an ant. They had no idea they were standing on a landmine. Because that woman wasn't just broke. She was silently the majority shareholder of the very company trying to destroy her. And when she finally opened her mouth, the silence that followed was deafening. This is the story of how arrogance met its match, and how a nobody revealed $1 billion secret that brought a courtroom to its knees. The air in the Superior Court of New York, District 4, smelled of old mahogany, floor wax, and expensive cologne. It was a smell designed to intimidate, to remind anyone who walked in that justice was not free. It was something you purchased by the hour. On the left side of the aisle sat the legal team for Orasys Technologies. They looked like a phalanx of sharks in Italian wool. There were 5 of them, led by Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man who didn't just win cases, he annihilated the opposition. He was 45, tanned, with teeth so white they looked synthetic, and a reputation for making grown men cry on the witness stand. He checked his Rolex Submariner every 30 seconds, a subtle signal to the judge that his time was worth more than anyone else's in the room. On the right side of the aisle sat Era Vance. Era was 42, but looked 50. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun held together by a cheap plastic clip. She wore a grey cardigan that had seen better decades, a faded floral blouse, and sensible, worn-out sneakers. She had no legal team. She had no paralegals whispering in her ear. She had a stack of crumpled papers inside a reusable grocery bag that sat on the table before her. "Docket number 4492B, the bailiff announced, his voice bored. "Orasys Technologies v. Ira Vance. Allegations of intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, and breach of non-disclosure agreements." Judge Reginald Sterling peered over his spectacles. Sterling was a man who preferred quick settlements and golf on Fridays. He looked at the 5 high-powered lawyers on the left, then shifted his gaze to the lonely figure on the right. He sighed, a sound that echoed through the silent room. "Miss Vance," Judge Sterling said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I see you are still representing yourself. I feel compelled to remind you, for the 3rd time, that the plaintiff is seeking damages in excess of $50 million. Are you sure you do not wish to seek court-appointed counsel?" Era didn't stand up immediately. She adjusted her glasses, drugstore readers, and looked at the judge. Her hands were shaking slightly. To the gallery, it looked like fear. "No, Your Honor," she said softly. Her voice was raspy, unused. "I will represent myself." Marcus Thorne suppressed a chuckle. He leaned over to his junior associate, a young man named Bradley, who looked like he'd been manufactured in a law school lab. "Watch this," Thorne whispered. "She'll be crying before lunch. I give it 20 minutes. Mr. Thorne?" The judge nodded. "Opening statements." Thorne stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish and walked toward the jury box. He didn't even look at Era. He treated her like furniture. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Thorne began, his voice a smooth baritone instrument, "we are here today because of greed. Plain and simple. My client, Orasys, is a pioneer in renewable energy software. We are changing the world. We employ thousands, and we protect our secrets." He spun around and pointed a finger directly at Era. "That woman," he thundered, "was a low-level janitorial contractor at our Seattle server farm 6 years ago. Just a cleaner. Someone trusted to empty the bins and mop the floors. But she wasn't just cleaning, was she? She was stealing. We have evidence that she accessed secure terminals, downloaded proprietary algorithms worth millions, and has been attempting to sell them on the black market under a pseudonym. She is a thief dressed in the clothing of the poor, hoping for your sympathy. Do not give it to her. The jury looked at Ira. They saw the frayed sweater, the grocery bag, the tired eyes. They didn't see a mastermind. They saw a desperate woman who probably got caught trying to make a quick buck. Ira sat stoically. She wrote something down on a yellow legal pad. Point 1. He called me a cleaner. Point 2. He thinks the algorithms were stolen. She looked up at Thorne, who was now smirking at her. He thought she was prey. He had no idea he was poking a sleeping dragon. The morning session was a bloodbath, or at least it appeared to be. Thorne called his first witness, the chief technical officer of Orasys, a man named David Goggins, no relation to the athlete, but just as intense. Goggins wore a suit that cost more than Era's car. "Mr. Goggins," Thorne asked, pacing the floor, "can you explain to the court the complexity of the Helios Code? It's the backbone of our solar efficiency grid," Goggins replied, looking down his nose at Era. "It took our team of 50 PhDs 4 years to write. It's quantum encrypted." "And is it possible," Thorne asked, feigning confusion, "that a janitor, a cleaning lady, could stumble upon this code and accidentally copy it?" "Impossible," Goggins scoffed. "You need high-level clearance, or you need to physically hack the mainframe. It requires sophisticated knowledge of C++ and Python." Thorne turned to Era. "Your witness, Ms. Vance?" Era stood up slowly. She knocked her grocery bag over, spilling a few papers. The courtroom tittered. Thorne rolled his eyes. She scrambled to pick them up, looking flustered. Sorry, she muttered. She approached the stand. She looked small next to the witness box. "Mr. Goggins," she said, reading from her notepad. "You said the Helios Code is quantum encrypted?" "That's right," Goggins said, bored. "And you said it took 50 PhDs to write it?" "Yes." "So," Era paused, pushing her glasses up her nose. "If I stole it, how did I bypass the quantum encryption using a janitor's key card?" Goggins blinked. "Well, we believe you stole a physical drive, or someone gave you access." "Someone?" Era asked. "Who?" "We don't know," Goggins snapped. "That's why we're here. You have the files. We found traces of the data on a laptop registered to your IP address." "My IP address," Era repeated. "Mr. Goggins, do you know what a VPN is?" "Of course I do," Goggins laughed. "I'm the CTO." "Then you know that IP addresses can be spoofed?" "Objection." Thorne stood up, annoyed. "The defendant is trying to lecture the CTO of a Fortune 500 company on basic computer science. It's irrelevant." "Sustained," Judge Sterling said, rubbing his temples. "Ms. Vance, move on. Do not waste the court's time with technicalities you clearly do not understand." Era tightened her jaw. "Technicalities I don't understand." She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I'm trying to establish that the evidence is circumstantial." "The evidence," the judge said sharply, "is that a laptop in your home contained stolen data. Do you have any questions for the witness that aren't nonsense?" Era looked at Goggins. "One more. Mr. Goggins, who wrote the original kernel for the Helios Code? The very first lines." Goggins hesitated. He looked at Thorne. Thorne gave a microscopic nod. "It was a collaborative effort," Goggins said smoothly. "Standard corporate development." "So no single person wrote the core architecture?" "No." Era nodded. "Thank you. No further questions." As she walked back to her seat, she felt the eyes of the room burning into her back. They thought she was an idiot. They thought she was drowning. Thorne leaned back in his chair, whispering loudly enough for the jury to hear. Sad, really. She doesn't even know how to frame a question. Lunch was called. Era sat alone on a bench in the hallway, eating a sandwich she had brought from home wrapped in wax paper. Marcus Thorne walked by with his team, heading toward a steakhouse down the street. He stopped and looked at her. "Miss Vance?" Thorne said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Look, I'm a reasonable man. Oris's just wants their property back. If you plead guilty now, we might drop the damages to $5 million. You'll be bankrupt, sure, but you won't go to federal prison for 10 years. Take the deal." Era looked up. There was mayonnaise on the corner of her mouth. She wiped it away with a paper napkin. "Mr. Thorne," she said. "Yes? Do you know who founded Oris? Thorne laughed. "Of course. The late Billionaire visionaries, the board of directors. It's a public entity." "No," Era said. "Do you know who founded it? Before the IPO, before the board?" "Some garage inventors in Silicon Valley." Thorne waved his hand dismissively. "Ancient history. Look, take the deal. You have 1 hour." He walked away, laughing with his colleagues. "She asked about the founders," he mocked. "Like that matters." Era watched him go. She reached into her grocery bag and pulled out a small black USB drive. It was old, scratched, and had a piece of masking tape on it. On the tape, written in faded Sharpie, were the initials, EV, Source. She wasn't eating lunch because she was hungry. She was eating to keep her energy up, because after the break, she wasn't going to defend herself anymore. She was going to go on the offensive. The afternoon session began with a heaviness in the air. The jury was tired. The judge was visibly irritated. He wanted this over. "Call your next witness, Mr. Thorne," Judge Sterling grumbled. "The plaintiff calls Sarah Jenkins, Human Resources Director," Thorne announced. A sharp-featured woman took the stand. She testified for 20 minutes about Era's employment record. "She was a ghost," Jenkins said. "Clocked in, clocked out. Zero social interaction. We had complaints about her hygiene. She was invisible. The perfect cover for a spy." Thorne beamed. "Thank you. Your witness." Era stood up. She didn't bring her notepad this time. She just walked to the podium. "Miss Jenkins," Ira said, "you have my employment file there?" "I do." "What was the date of my hiring?" Jenkins flipped a page. "October 14th, 2015. "And the date of my termination?" "You weren't terminated," Jenkins corrected. "You resigned without notice on February 2nd, 2018. "Right," Era said. "And in that file, does it list my previous employer?" Jenkins squinted at the paper. It says, "Self-employed consultant." Jenkins laughed, which usually means unemployed. "And does it list my bank account for direct deposit?" "Yes," Jenkins said. "An account at First National." "Read the account number, please. Just the last 4 digits." "Objection," Thorne shouted. "Relevance? We are violating privacy laws here." "It's my own account," Ara said calmly. "I waive the privacy." The judge waved his hand. "Answer the question." "The last 4 digits are 8890, Jenkins said. Ara turned to the jury. "Keep that number in mind, 8890. She turned back to Jenkins. "Ms. Jenkins, during my time as a janitor, did I ever submit any complaints to HR? No. Did I ever ask for a raise? No. Did I ever cash my paychecks?" The courtroom went silent. Jenkins frowned. She looked down at the file. She flipped a page, then another. Her brow furrowed. I don't see any record of cashed checks here. The funds were deposited, but... Wait. "What is it?" Judge Sterling asked, leaning forward. "The checks were returned," Jenkins whispered. "Every single one of them, for 3 years. Returned to the company treasury." Thorne stood up, confused. "Administrative error, irrelevant. Is it? Era asked, her voice suddenly harder, stronger. Miss Jenkins, why would a poor janitor who needs money to steal secrets return 3 years of salary? Jenkins was stumped. I don't know. Maybe, Era said, stepping closer, because she didn't need the money. Objection! Speculation! Thorne yelled. Sustained, the judge said. But he was looking at Era differently now. The crazy cat lady vibe was fading. Something else was taking its place. No further questions, Era said. Thorne was rattled. He didn't like surprises. He whispered to his associate. Find out why she returned the checks, now. But Ira wasn't done. Your Honor, she said. I would like to call a hostile witness. You don't have a witness list, Ms. Vance? The judge said. I do, she said. He is in the courtroom right now. She pointed a shaking finger at the plaintiff's table. I call Marcus Thorne to the stand. The courtroom erupted. Thorne laughed out loud. Me? You can't call the opposing counsel. Actually, Era said, citing a case number from memory, State ver Davidson, 1998. If the counsel is a material fact witness to the creation of the fraudulent documents, he can be called. Fraudulent documents? Thorne's smile vanished. How dare you? I have the right, Era said to the judge. Mr. Thorne signed the affidavit claiming he personally verified the IP theft. I want to ask him how. Judge Sterling looked at Thorne. He looked at Era. He banged his gavel. I will allow it. Mr. Thorne, take the stand. Thorne was furious. He buttoned his jacket so tight it looked like it might pop. He marched to the witness box, glaring at Era. I will destroy you, his eyes said. Era stood at the podium. She took a sip of water. She took off her glasses. Without the cheap readers, her eyes were sharp, icy blue. Intelligent. Mr. Thorne, she began, you represent Orasys? I am the lead counsel for the firm representing them, yes. And you bill them, what, $800 an hour? My rates are standard for a partner at Sterling Hargrave. Who signs your checks, Mr. Thorne? The CFO of Orasys. No, Era said. Who signs the checks? The ultimate authority, the majority shareholder. The majority shareholder is a holding company called Vance Holloway Industries, Thorne said, bored. They are a silent conglomerate based in Zurich. Vance Holloway, Era repeated. Have you ever met the CEO of Vance Holloway? No one has, Thorne sneered. They are a recluse, probably some Swiss banker. So you've never met the person who actually owns the company you are defending? It's a holding company. It doesn't matter. It matters, Era said, because if you work for Orasys, and Orasys is owned by Vance Holloway, then you work for Vance Holloway. Technically, yes. What is your point? Era leaned in. The drama was palpable. Mr. Thorne, did you check the incorporation papers of Vance Holloway before you sued me? No. Why would I? Because, Era said, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphones picked up perfectly. If you had, you would have noticed something interesting about the name Vance. Thorne froze. The jury froze. Era Vance. Vance Holloway. Thorne laughed nervously. A coincidence. Vance is a common name. Is it? Era turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to enter Defense Exhibit A. She reached into her grocery bag and pulled out a single, pristine document. It wasn't crumpled. It was heavy, cream-colored bond paper with a gold seal. She handed it to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to the judge. Judge Sterling put on his glasses. He read the document. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at Era. Then he looked at the document again. He looked at Thorne. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, his voice trembling, you might want to see this. Thorne snatched the paper. He scanned it. His face went pale. The tan drained right out of him. This is a forgery, he stammered. It is a notarized deed of incorporation, Era said, her voice commanding the room now. Dated 1998, showing the formation of Vance Holloway Industries. She turned to the jury, and right there, on the bottom line, is the signature of the founder and sole proprietor. She pointed to herself. Me. I am Era Vance, she declared, her voice ringing out like a bell. I didn't steal the Helios Code, Mr. Thorne. I wrote it. I founded Aurasis, and I own 51% of the company that is paying your salary. For 10 seconds, the only sound in the courtroom was the hum of the HVAC system and the frantic ticking of Marcus Thorne's watch. The silence was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting so violently that reality had to catch up. Thorne stared at the document. His hands were shaking. Not a little tremor, but a violent shake that made the paper rattle like dry leaves in a gale. He looked at the signature, Era Vance, and then at the woman standing 10 feet away, the woman in the cheap cardigan, the woman he had mocked. This is ridiculous, Thorne finally choked out, though his voice lacked its usual boom. It sounded thin, reedy. Your Honor, this is clearly a sophisticated fabrication, a prank. Miss Vance is a mentally unstable woman who— Mr. Thorne, Judge Sterling cut him off. The judge was no longer looking at the clock. He was looking at Era with a mixture of awe and terror. I have seen the seal of the Zurich Chamber of Commerce before. It is watermarked. It is embossed. If this is a forgery, it is the best I have seen in 30 years on the bench. It's impossible, Thorne shrieked, losing his composure entirely. He turned to the gallery, looking for support from his team, but his associates were frozen. They were frantically typing on their phones, likely Googling Vance Holloway ownership. She was a janitor. She cleaned the toilets in the executive suite. Do you expect me to believe a billionaire was scrubbing grout? Era stepped away from the podium. She didn't walk like a defendant anymore. Her posture straightened. The slump of the exhausted worker vanished, replaced by the rigid, commanding spine of a woman who had built empires. She walked toward the jury box, her eyes scanning every juror. Mr. Thorne asks a good question, Era said. Her voice had changed, too. The rasp was gone. It was smooth, cultured, authoritative. Why would I scrub toilets? She turned to face Thorne. I founded Aurasis 20 years ago in a garage in Palo Alto, she began, pacing the floor. I wrote the Helios Code to save energy, to help the planet. But 5 years ago, after my husband died, I stepped back. I became a silent partner. I let the board of directors run the show. I trusted them. She stopped in front of the plaintiff's table, looking down at the young associates. But then the profits started dipping. The innovation stopped, and I started hearing rumors that the new CEO, Julian Blackwood, was cutting corners, that he was selling user data, that the company I built to save the world was being used to exploit it. Thorne opened his mouth to object, but no sound came out. I couldn't prove it from the outside, Era continued. Julian Blackwood hid everything behind layers of encryption and bureaucracy. If I had walked in the front door as Era Vance, the majority shareholder, he would have shredded the documents before I reached the elevator. I needed to see what was happening on the ground. I needed to be invisible. She smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. And who is more invisible than the cleaning lady? The jury gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. It was the perfect narrative flip. The predator was actually the prey was the hunter. For 3 years, Era said, her voice rising. I emptied your trash, Mr. Thorne. I cleaned the conference room after your strategy meetings. I heard you joke about overbilling clients. I heard Julian Blackwood laugh about stupid users and backdoor data sales. And every night, I went into the server room, not to steal the code, but to audit the logs. I wasn't stealing Oris's property. I was auditing my property. Objection! Thorne screamed, desperate now. This is testimony. She is testifying from the floor. She must be under oath. I am under oath, Era snapped, whipping around. You called me as a hostile witness, remember? Thorne turned pale. He had walked right into it. Judge Sterling leaned forward. Ms. Vance, if you are indeed the owner, why let this lawsuit go this far? Why let yourself be arrested? Why sit here for days and let them humiliate you? Era looked at the judge. Her eyes were sad. Because, Your Honor, I needed this. She gestured to the court. I needed a public record. If I had fired them privately, they would have sued me for wrongful termination. They would have spun the story in the press. I needed them to stand up in a court of law under penalty of perjury and lie. I needed them to present their fraudulent evidence so that when I destroy them, there is no coming back. She reached into her grocery bag again. Defense Exhibit B, she said. This time she pulled out a laptop, not the cheap one seized by the police, a sleek, military-grade machine. Mr. Thorne said my laptop contained stolen algorithms, Era said. He was half right. It contains the original source code, time-stamped 1999. But it also contains something else, audio recordings. She placed the laptop on the evidence table. Recordings of the board meeting on November 12th, where Julian Blackwood explicitly discussed framing the janitor because she was asking too many questions. Thorne collapsed into his chair. He put his head in his hands. The game was over. He just didn't know how bad the score was yet. The courtroom was in chaos. The bailiff had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Reporters in the back row were running out of the room to call their editors. This was the story of the decade. Janitor sued for millions, turns out to be boss. Order! Order! Judge Sterling shouted. When the room quieted, the judge looked at Thorne. Mr. Thorne, I am going to ask you once. Did you know? Thorne stood up, sweating profusely. Your Honor, I am outside counsel. I act on the instructions of the CEO, Julian Blackwood. I had no idea about the ownership structure. I was told Ms. Vance was a disgruntled employee. Ignorance is not a defense for malicious prosecution, the judge growled. I demand a recess, Thorne yelled. I need to consult my client. Denied, Era said. The room looked at her. I beg your pardon? The judge asked. I said denied, Era repeated. She walked over to the defense table and picked up her phone. She had turned it on. Mr. Thorne represents Orisys. I am the majority shareholder of Orisys. I am effectively his boss's boss, and I am instructing him to remain seated. She dialed a number on speakerphone. The line rang once. Julian Blackwood's office. A crisp secretary's voice answered. Put him on, Era said. I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood is in a meeting, and this is Era Vance. Put him on or you're fired, too. There was a frantic shuffling on the other end. A few seconds later, a smooth, arrogant male voice came through the courtroom speakers. Era? Julian Blackwood's voice filled the room. He sounded annoyed, not scared. He clearly didn't know the video feed wasn't live yet. I thought you were in court. Are you calling to surrender? Did Thorne finally break you? Era looked at the jury. They were on the edge of their seats. Hello, Julian, she said calmly. I'm actually standing in the middle of the courtroom right now. You're on speaker. The judge is listening. The jury is listening. Silence on the line. Then a nervous laugh. Is this a joke? Put Thorne on. Thorne is indisposed, Era said, glancing at the lawyer, who looked like he was having a cardiac event. Julian, I'm calling to inform you of a few changes. Changes? You're a squatter, Era. You're nothing. I have the board. I have the votes. Even if you reveal your identity, you can't touch me. I have ironclad contracts. You can't fire me without cause. Cause, Era mused. You mean like corporate espionage, fraud, perjury, conspiracy to commit a felony? You have no proof, Julian snarled. Just the ramblings of a senile woman who likes to play dress-up as a janitor. Actually, Judge Sterling interrupted, leaning into the microphone. Mr. Blackwood, this is Judge Reginald Sterling. We have just entered into evidence a deed of incorporation and audio recordings that seem to contradict your statement. I suggest you stop talking. On the other end of the line, the sound of glass shattering was heard. Julian had likely thrown his scotch against the wall. Julian, Era said, her voice dropping to 0 degrees Kelvin. Do you remember the Phantom Protocol? Don't, Julian whispered. The arrogance was gone. Era, don't do it. The Phantom Protocol, Era explained to the jury, is a failsafe I built into the Helios Code. In the event that the company leadership becomes compromised, the founder can initiate a remote override. It locks all executive accounts. It freezes all company assets, and it downloads every single email, text, and transaction from the CEO's private server to the SEC. Era, please! Julian shouted. We can work this out. I'll give you a settlement. I'll resign. Too late, Era said. She tapped a key on her laptop. Enter. It's done, she said. The FBI has your files, Julian. They should be arriving at your office. Right about now. As if on cue, faint sirens could be heard in the background of the call. Then, shouting, FBI, open up! The line went dead. Era put the phone down. She looked at Thorne. You're fired, she said. The silence that followed the termination of the call with Julian Blackwood was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a crater after the bomb has gone off. The courtroom air felt electrically charged, thick with the invisible residue of a corporate empire collapsing in real time. Marcus Thorne, the man who had strutted into the room 3 days ago, like a gladiator entering an arena, was now physically deflating. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow and erratic. The polished veneer of the high-priced litigator had cracked, revealing a terrified man who realized he was standing on the wrong side of an avalanche. His team of associates, the sharks in Italian wool, were no longer looking at him for guidance. They were physically distancing themselves, scooting their chairs inches away, eyes glued to their phones, likely deleting emails or updating their LinkedIn profiles. Judge Sterling cleared his throat. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, his voice devoid of the earlier annoyance. Now it held a grave, almost pitying tone. It appears your client is currently indisposed, and given the evidence Ms. Vance has just presented, evidence that suggests this entire proceeding is built on a foundation of perjury and fraud, I am inclined to ask, how do you wish to proceed? Thorne blinked, trying to clear the fog of panic from his eyes. He straightened his tie, but his hands were shaking so badly he knocked a pen onto the floor. He didn't pick it up. Your Honor, Thorne stammered, his voice cracking. In light of recent developments and the potential conflict of interest regarding my firm's representation of Aurasys, the plaintiff moves to voluntarily dismiss this case. He swallowed hard, looking not at the judge, but at the exit sign. We move to dismiss without prejudice, Thorne added quickly. We will withdraw the complaint immediately. It was a tactical retreat. A dismissal without prejudice meant the case was over. But technically, it could be brought back later. It was a way to save face, to pretend this was just a clerical error rather than a moral catastrophe. It was the coward's way out. "Objection!" a voice cut through the room. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Era Vance stood by her table. She hadn't moved. She looked like a statue carved from granite. Thorne whipped his head around. "What?" "Ms. Vance, I am offering to drop the lawsuit. You walk away free. No damages, no debt. Take the win." Era slowly removed her glasses. She looked at Thorne with eyes that seemed to age him 10 years in 10 seconds. "You don't get to quit, Mr. Thorne," she said. "You don't get to drag me through the mud, humiliate me in front of the world, accuse me of being a thief, and then just say, 'Never mind,' when you realize you've lost." She turned to Judge Sterling. "Your Honor, a dismissal without prejudice leaves a stain. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, I did do it, but they simply chose not to pursue it. It leaves a question mark next to my name. I don't want a question mark. I want a period. I want a verdict." The judge studied her. He had seen thousands of defendants beg for a dismissal. He had never seen one demand a fight when the war was already won. "Ms. Vance," Judge Sterling warned gently, "if you reject the dismissal, the jury must decide. There is always a risk with a jury. Are you sure you want to roll the dice?" Era looked at the jury box. She looked at the 12 ordinary people, a schoolteacher, a mechanic, a retired nurse, who had watched her be treated like garbage for 3 days. "I trust them," Era said. "I trust that they know the difference between a janitor and a thief, and I trust they know the difference between a lawyer and a liar." Thorne flinched as if he'd been slapped. The judge nodded slowly. A faint smile touched his lips. "Very well. The motion to dismiss is denied. The case will go to the jury." He turned to the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the testimony. You have seen the evidence. You have heard the audio confession of the CEO of the plaintiff company. I usually send juries back to the deliberation room, but given the extraordinary nature of this trial, do you require time to deliberate?" The jury foreman, a heavy-set man named Frank who worked in construction, didn't even look at the other jurors. He didn't need to. He had seen them nodding, gasping and glaring at Thorne for the last hour. Frank stood up. He adjusted his collar. "No, Your Honor," Frank said, his voice booming. "We don't need to leave the room. We've seen enough." Thorne closed his eyes. "What is your verdict?" the judge asked. "On the count of intellectual property theft." Frank read from a paper. His hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the moment. "We find the defendant, Era Vance, not guilty." A ripple of breath went through the room. "On the count of corporate espionage, not guilty. On the count of breach of contract, not guilty." Frank paused. He looked directly at Marcus Thorne. "And regarding the defendant's counterclaim for malicious prosecution and emotional distress, we find in favor of Ms. Vance." The courtroom erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a release of tension that had been building for days. People cheered. The court reporter stopped typing and clapped. Even the stoic bailiff let out a low whistle. Judge Sterling banged his gavel, but his heart wasn't in it. He let the noise wash over the room for a long moment before calling for order. "Order! Order in the court!" As the noise subsided, Ira didn't cheer. She didn't jump up and down. She simply closed her eyes and exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. The weight of 3 years of hiding, of 3 days of torture, lifted off her shoulders. Thorne was shoving papers into his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements. He looked like a rat trying to escape a sinking ship. He signaled to his associates, and they bolted for the aisle, heads down. Thorne tried to follow them, but a figure blocked his path. Ira stood in the center of the aisle. She wasn't physically imposing, but in that moment, she loomed over him. "Excuse me," Thorne muttered, refusing to make eye contact. "I have to, Mr. Thorne," Era said. He froze. He had to look at her. He looked up, and for the first time, he really saw her. Not the grey cardigan, not the messy hair. He saw the intelligence, the steel, the immense power he had been too arrogant to recognize. "Look, Miss Vance," Thorne whispered, his voice trembling. "I was just doing my job. It's nothing personal. It's the game. You know that. I represent the client. I didn't know about the ownership situation." "You knew I was poor," Era said softly. The room went deadly silent again. Everyone wanted to hear this. "You didn't know I was a billionaire. True," she continued, "but you knew I was a janitor. You knew I made minimum wage. You knew I couldn't afford a transcript, let alone a defense team. And because you knew that, you didn't just sue me. You mocked me. You tried to break me. You turned the law, which is supposed to be a shield for the weak, into a sword for the strong." Thorne licked his dry lips. I can offer you a settlement. My firm has insurance. We can—" "I don't want your money," Era cut him off. "I have more money in my couch cushions than you will make in a lifetime." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan. Thorne flinched, as if expecting a weapon. What she pulled out was small, rectangular, and caught the courtroom lights. It was a business card, but it wasn't paper. It was matte black metal, laser-etched with gold lettering. It was the calling card of the global elite. She held it out. Thorne didn't take it. She tucked it into the breast pocket of his expensive Italian suit. "That is my personal number," she said. "But don't call it." "Then, what is this?" Thorne asked, bewildered. "It's a reminder," Ira said. "Because as of 5 minutes ago, I have instructed the new acting council of Orasys to initiate a full forensic audit of every hour you have billed my company for the last 10 years. Thorne's knees actually buckled. He had to grab the back of a bench to stay upright. An audit like that wouldn't just find billing errors. It would find the padded hours, the lavish dinners charged as research, the corners cut. It would act as a nuclear bomb on his career. "If I find a single dollar unaccounted for," Era whispered, leaning in close, "or if I find one more case where you bullied someone because they were too poor to fight back, I will report you to the state bar. I will sue your firm for malpractice. And I will make sure the only courtroom you ever step into again is traffic court to fight a speeding ticket." Thorne stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Tears welled up in his eyes. The realization of his total ruin was hitting him. "You're done, Marcus," she said. She turned her back on him. She didn't watch him leave. She didn't care. He was already a memory. She walked back to her table and began to pack up her things. The reusable grocery bag, the crumpled legal pad, the worn-out pencil. She moved with the methodical, humble grace of the cleaner she had pretended to be. "Ms. Vance?" It was Judge Sterling. He had stepped down from the bench and was standing near the gate. It was a breach of protocol, but nobody cared. Ira stopped her. She clipped her hair back with the cheap plastic clip. "Yes, Your Honor." "That was—" The judge paused, searching for the word. "That was the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed in this building." Era smiled. It was a tired smile, but it reached her eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor." "May I ask," the judge said, "what you intend to do now? You own the company. You have the power. Will you go to the press? Will you take a victory lap?" Era looked around the empty courtroom. The gallery was clearing out. The dust motes were dancing in the afternoon sunbeams. "No press," she said. I have a lot of work to do. Oasis has been rotting from the head down for 3 years. It's full of garbage, bad contracts, bad policies, bad people. She picked up her grocery bag and slung it over her shoulder. She looked at the spot where she had stood for 3 days, accused and belittled. "I'm going to do what I've always done, Your Honor," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I'm going to clean it up." She turned and walked down the center aisle, her sneakers squeaking softly on the floor. The heavy double doors swung open, and Era Vance walked out into the blinding sunlight of the city, leaving the darkness of the courtroom behind her forever. The following morning, the atmosphere outside the Oasis headquarters in downtown Manhattan was less like a business district and more like a siege. The news of Julian Blackwood's arrest and the revelation of the janitor Billionaire had dominated the 24-hour news cycle. Satellite trucks clogged the streets, and a sea of reporters jostled for position behind police barricades. They were all waiting for one thing: a glimpse of Era Vance. Inside the glass-walled lobby, the tension was suffocating. Employees who had spent years ignoring the quiet woman with the cleaning cart were now huddled in frantic clusters, whispering, scrolling through Twitter, and terrified for their jobs. At 8:55 a.m., a hush fell over the crowd outside. A single black town car, sleek and unmarked, parted the sea of reporters like a shark moving through water. It pulled up to the curb. The doorman, a man named Henry, who had once threatened to report Ira for loitering when she took a break on the steps, rushed forward. His hands were shaking as he reached for the handle. He opened the door and bowed low, his face a mask of pale regret. Ira stepped out. The transformation was absolute. The grey, frayed cardigan was gone. In its place, she wore a tailored white power suit that cost more than Henry made in a year. Her hair, usually trapped in a messy bun, cascaded over her shoulders in polished waves. She wore sunglasses, but even behind the dark lenses, her gaze was piercing. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't acknowledge the shouting reporters. She walked with the unstoppable momentum of a tidal wave. She entered the lobby. The silence that hit the room was instant and total. Ira walked across the marble floor, the same floor she had mopped thousands of times. She could see the smudge marks where the buffers hadn't done a good job. "I'll have to mention that," she thought. She stopped at the reception desk. Stacy, the head receptionist, was frozen. Stacy was the type of person who smiled up at executives and scowled down at service staff. She had made a sport of making Ira wait for the service elevator key, often pretending to be on the phone while Ira stood there with a heavy bucket. Now, Stacy looked like she was waiting for an executioner. Ira lowered her sunglasses. She looked Stacy in the eye. "Good morning, Stacy," Ira said. Her voice was pleasant, but it carried a weight that made Stacy flinch. "Miss Vance?" Stacy stammered, her face flushing crimson. I didn't know. If I had known." "You didn't know I was the owner," Ira corrected gently. "But you knew I was a human being, and that should have been enough." She didn't fire her. She didn't yell. She simply put her sunglasses back on and walked past. That shame would be a heavier punishment than any termination letter. Ira bypassed the turnstiles. She didn't need a badge anymore, and walked to the elevator bank. A group of junior executives were waiting for the lift. When they saw her coming, they scattered, terrified to be in the same enclosed space as the woman who had just taken down their CEO. She stepped into the private executive elevator. She pressed the button for the 50th floor, the boardroom. As the numbers ticked upward, Ira took a breath. For 3 years, she had ridden the service elevator, smelling of bleach and trash. Now, she smelled of expensive perfume and victory. But she didn't feel triumphant. She felt focused. The rot in Aurasis went deep. Julian Blackwood was just the symptom. The culture was the disease. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. The boardroom was full. The 6 remaining board members, the ones who hadn't been arrested yet, were seated around the long oval table. They looked like schoolboys who had been called to the principal's office. These were men who controlled millions, men who had signed off on the lawsuit against her without reading it, men who had laughed at the janitor problem. They stood up nervously as she entered. One of them, a man named Sterling, no relation to the judge, tried to smile. "Era, what a surprise," he choked out. "We were just discussing how to handle this misunderstanding. We had no idea Julian was going rogue." Era dropped her leather portfolio onto the table. The thud made them jump. "Sit down," she commanded. They sat. "Let's be clear," Era said, pacing the room. "Julian didn't go rogue. Julian did exactly what you paid him to do. He cut costs. He inflated the stock price. And you didn't care how he did it, as long as your dividends kept coming. You didn't care that he was stealing data. You didn't care that he was framing an innocent woman." "We were misled," Sterling protested. "You were complacent," Ira snapped. "And complacency is death in this industry." She tapped the intercom on the table. "Security," she said. "Yes, Ms. Vance?" The voice cracked over the speaker. "Please escort Mr. Sterling, Mr. De Silva and Mr. Klein out of the building. Their tenure on the board has ended, effective immediately." The 3 men gasped. "You can't do that. We have contracts." "I have the majority vote," Era said, cold ply. "And I have cause, negligence, breach of fiduciary duty. Get out before I call the police and add you to Julian's indictment." As security dragged the protesting men out, Era turned to the 3 remaining members, the younger ones, the ones who had voted against Julian's worst policies, but hadn't fought hard enough. "You 3 stay," she said. "You're on probation. We have a company to rebuild." Over the next 6 months, the transformation of Aurasis was total. Era didn't just scrub the floors, she scrubbed the soul of the company. She fired the entire C-suite. She rehired the brilliant engineers Julian had laid off to save money. She redirected the massive executive bonuses into R&D and employee salaries. But her most meaningful act wasn't in the boardroom. One evening, late when the building was quiet, Era went down to the basement. She walked to the janitor's closet, the cramped, windowless room where she had spent 3 years of her life. She had ordered a small renovation. The closet was still there, but next to it she had mounted a simple bronze plaque. It wasn't flashy. It was placed at eye level, so you had to stop and look at it. She ran her fingers over the raised lettering. In this room, the truth was preserved. Never underestimate the person holding the mop. Evie Era Vance stood there for a long time. She had been treated like nothing. She had been invisible, but she had learned that invisibility was a superpower. It let you see who people really were. She turned off the light in the basement hallway and headed back upstairs. The janitor was gone. The Queen had returned, and this time she was going to make sure the castle was clean. What a ride. Era Vance didn't just beat the system, she owned it. This story reminds us that arrogance is a dangerous blinder. Marcus Thorne and Julian Blackwood looked at Era and saw a victim. They saw a frayed sweater and cheap shoes and assumed she was weak. They didn't bother to look into her eyes and see the fire burning there. It's a powerful lesson for all of us. Never judge a book by its cover, and certainly never judge a person by their job title. You never know who you're dealing with. The quiet person in the corner might just be the one holding all the cards. If you enjoyed this story of justice, karma, and the ultimate comeback, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Ira? Would you have revealed yourself sooner or waited for the perfect moment? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.